In horror, we usually see the final girl trope as someone who survives by being a masculine female who is virginal, pure, and boyish. What might this suggest to the audience? Perhaps that in order for one to survive in these films, one cannot think or act sexual, and one must possess masculine traits. There's also a connection between being asexual and masculine to survival rate. The characters who possess such distinct traits, which narrow down to usually one character, that being the final girl, most often are the ones to survive. In this video, I argue that horror films, specifically slasher films, discriminate against females and categorize them as the weaker sex due to the films being a reflection of the overtly masculine, male chauvinist, anti-feminist, and misogynistic society in which we live in. Some might say that the final girl does portray the look of an empowered female, and after all, she is the lone survivor of the movie. But in reality, the final girl doesn't always survive completely on her own, because sometimes we find that she does so because of the help of a male. For example, in the 1978 movie Halloween, Laurie fights off Michael, the killer, throughout the entire movie, but she survives only after Dr. Loomis arrives just in time to shoot Michael and stop him from killing Laurie. We also see this happening similarly in the 1960 film Psycho. In the end, just as Lila is about to be attacked by Norman Bates, Sam stops him from doing so, saving Lila. The idea that the final girl embodies feminist politics is hardly a truthful concept. In reality, the final girl actually disempowers the females in the audience because she is conforming to the norms of the patriarchal reality of society and accepting her fate of inevitable masculinization. Even after she survives, she's still seen as crazy and paranoid. Not to mention that the only way the final girl is able to kill or escape the monster is by taking on male characteristics, which is hardly being a feminist. These characteristics include being independent, quick-witted, aggressive, and playing into the fight aspect instead of flight, unlike feminists who know how to use their femininity in their favor. For example, in the 2001 film Legally Blonde, a more feminist-driven movie, protagonist Elle Woods uses her charm and wit to win over the jury and successfully defend her client during a murder trial. She also does so without the help of a male character.
Downstairs, which would mean that you would have had to have found Mrs. Wyndham with a gun in her hand to make your story plausible. Isn't that right?
She's my age. Did she tell you that? How would you feel if your father married someone who was your age?
You, however, had time to hide the gun, didn't you, Chutney? After you shot your father.
I didn't mean to shoot him. I thought it was you walking through the door.
Woods is the ultimate exhibition of girl power. The movie successfully passes the Bechdel test because it includes at least two women who talk to each other about something other than a man. Woods is a feminist character who values her own strength as a female and uses her feminism as a weapon, and despite her background of being a blonde sorority girl, she gains the respect of her peers.
Harvard. Law school.
You got into Harvard Law?
What, like it's hard? Oh my gosh, Warner, it's gonna be so great.
Carol Clover notes that the final girl is almost always brunette, modestly dressed, and clearly naive in comparison to her friends and other film characters. Horror films envision the perfect girl to be this way, playing along with the stereotype that blondes are dumb and sexual in nature, and unable to or not competent enough to survive from the killer. In a nutshell, horror films can be considered anti-feminist because of their misrepresentation of females, sexual objectification, and explicit violence against them. The hypersexualized imagery of females in horror is specifically intended to entertain or excite the male audience. The cinematic gaze of horror films is undoubtedly masculine, as females in horror tend to show off their bodies in provocative ways. The females tend to be killed off in graphic, sometimes repulsive ways, almost as if it seems that they have to endure more pain and bear the torture put upon them, in contrast with the male deaths, which occur in the blink of an eye and don't seem so torturous and agonizing. The female suffers more and is depicted as helpless as opposed to their male counterpart. These films often glorify violence against females, which can be due to the fact that, statistically speaking, women are very frequently targeted as victims. Carol Clover concludes that The Final Girl is an agreed-upon fiction for male viewers' use of her as a vehicle for his own sadomasochist fantasies. Although not every horror film's final girl checks off every description box, some version of her can always be seen. This brings us to modern horror and how the final girl has evolved over the years. In the 2017 film Happy Death Day, the final girl is Tree, what I would call an unconventional version of the final girl. She is sexual in nature, self-centered, ruthless, and has a long list of enemies. But what makes her a final girl, just as the others we've seen throughout history, is the fact that she feels part of the other. She's different from the sorority girls that she lives with, and is not as feminine as them. She acts in self-reliance and doesn't always do what people expect her to do. She gives a new face to the modern version of the final girl. She's more complex than other final girls we've seen in the past, considering that she has a significant evolution from the beginning of Happy Death Day. She evolves from a sassy millennial to an empathetic and emotionally aware female. Happy Death Day has its feminist aspects, but in the end, certain stereotypes of dumb sorority girls are still being played, and the age-old trope of the beautiful victim, not to mention that concept of woman tearing down other women, isn't quite feminist, even if for a change the killer is a female. Tree's character herself does reflect more feminist qualities than that of other final girls. Perhaps the prospect of the final girl is becoming more feminist as times change.